Countdown. Okay, so we have the recording going, which means we can get down to business. So this week we're going to do something a little bit different than our usual style. As most of you know, that my usual style is to select a portion of the text and then to try to slice through its meanings using various commentaries from our tradition. But we're now delving in our parasha of Vayeishev into the novella of Joseph. That is to say, we're now in the beginning of this parasha through to almost the end of the whole book of Genesis are going to be dealing with the life of Joseph. And it's almost a self-contained literary unit in the sense that if you were to pick this up in paperback form off the shelf, it would be perfectly readable in and of itself. But perfectly readable is the issue that I want to focus on, because we often slice the Tanakh so thinly to get every drop of meaning out of it that we sometimes fail to appreciate the literary style itself. Now, there's another main reason why we often fail to appreciate the literary style of the Tanakh, which is it doesn't seem to have literary style to most of us. Right? Who here was ever forced or got to, depending upon your relationship, to read Dickens?
Oh, yes.
Dickens, Charles Dickens, right? Tale of Two Cities, Great Expectations, and Pickwick Papers, which actually is my favorite. When you were forced to read, when you got to read that for part of your high school class, what did the teachers make you do? Did you just read the book and put it down? No? Did you? What's that? You did reports on it, and the reports had to sort of find the metaphors and the structures and the allusions and the foreshadowings and all those great literary styles. And when you're going through a big fat book like that, it's easy to do a report, because if you read the book or you got the Cliff Notes, then they didn't have them back then. Oh dear. I guess you actually had to learn.
Cliff Notes. Oh yeah.
Not in her school. So you can find tons of examples and sentences and pull out all the different paragraphs you need, because there's so much there. Dickens was known for being wordy, and most modern authors are known for being wordy. If you were going to buy a book at the full market value off the shelf of a new bestseller, what are the new ones even running for nowadays? Like 25, 30 bucks for a, right?
26 average price.
Exactly. You do not want to buy a 50-page book for 25 bucks. You would go, what? So they pad them out. Even though the plot itself may not need 597 pages, the weight of the book is an estimation of its value. And so they make sure to make it a heavy book. A big book, exactly. And when we come to Torah in particular, but Tanakh in general, despite the fact that we bind them and publish them so that they are big and heavy like this, it's not a big book. And the stories are not very wordy. Again, I know we've got that giant scroll in the sanctuary that we read from, but that's in about 30-point font and rather large margins. If you printed the entire Torah is just a book, it would not be very long. It would not be a very long book, certainly much shorter than most of the bestsellers that come out nowadays. And it's written in a style which then makes it harder. Even the narrative sections, not even counting the legal sections, but the narrative sections. So what we're going to look at today is a compare and contrast. And I'm hoping that we'll see that the narrative style of Torah is more lyrical and beautiful than you thought, and that expanding it, filling in the gaps, doesn't always help. So we're going to look at the same story two different ways. Make sense? Okay. We're still using the traditional sources, and for once we're going to start by handing out the handouts. So the Eitz Chaim Chumash, for all of its beauty and glory and many of its commentaries and insights, follows the JPS translation, the Jewish Publication Society of the 20th century, the second one, not the 1917 version, which was an attempt to modernize the language of the translation and to make it more understandable and accessible to modern English readers. Now, the problem with making something more accessible is you often obliterate that which makes it unique, that which makes it distinct and different. So what I have handed out is, at the front, is the beginning of this parasha, as written in Everett Fox's 5 Books of Moses, which was a translation that attempted to hew closer to the original Hebrew linguistic style, but still in English. Just, we've got to deal with the language we've got. So we're going to read it first in this, which hopefully will exemplify and really bring to the foretaste the flavor of the original Hebrew as best we can without actually reading the original Hebrew. Make sense? Everyone with me so far? And then we're going to go back and we're going to reread a portion of it that has been expanded and expounded upon in a more familiar literary style. And we'll see the difference. And then all of you can put your good high school skills of compare and contrast to work. Okay, so reader for Everett Fox, so the more literary Hebrew style.
This is Everett?
This is Everett, right at the beginning. Yaakov settled. Very true.
Yaakov settled in the land of his father's sojournings, in the land of Canaan. These are the begettings of Yaakov. Joseph, 17 years old, used to tend the sheep along with his brothers, for he was serving lad with the sons of Bilhah and the sons of Zilpah, his father's wives. And Joseph brought a report of them, an ill one, to their father. Now Yisrael loved Joseph above all his sons, for he was a son of old age to him. So he made him an ornamented coat. When his brothers saw that it was he whom their father loved above all his brothers, they hated him and could not speak to him in peace.
All right, so Dickens? Dickens would have taken about 5 chapters to get this much information to us.
I guess so.
Right? So what do we know so far?
Every sentence has that.
Yaakov settled in the land of his father.
Yaakov settled. It was the land of his father's sojournings, meaning we're hearkening back to Isaac and to the ancestral covenant. And what do we know about Joseph? Hold on, we got a hand over here. I got to respect the hand.
Yes.
His brothers hate him. Right? By the end of the paragraph, we know that his brothers hate him. And why do they hate him? Because he's favorite of the father, and because he's a tattletale. Right? He brings these ill reports. So Joseph is a tattletale. He brings reports on them, not always good ones. There's also mention about the distinctions and differentiations between the different brothers belonging to different mothers.
But it doesn't specify who his mother was.
Well, yes, the astute reader would know that he was born from Rachel, which was the favorite wife.
Right.
Yes.
So that should be in here.
It should be in here. You're right. There's a lot of things that should be in here. Like, for example, why did Joseph bring tattle on his brothers? Or why was Joseph in a position to tattle on his brothers? Why didn't the other brothers do it if there was a problem? Or was Joseph doing the same work as them or not doing the same work as them? And
Dickens would have told you.
Dickens would have told you in excruciating detail, and would have told you all about life in this time period in Canaan. And you would have known what everything was like. And you could have smelt the sheep through Dickens. Here, it's just this very rapid fire paraphrase almost. This reads like the Cliff Notes to the Bible rather than the Bible.
And at this point, I want to know, when Joseph tells these tales about his brothers, are they true or not? Is he exaggerating? I mean, I'm
Just because it's
sensitized to the lying progeny of Jacob.
Yeah, just because it's a report doesn't mean that it's an honest
That's
one.
right.
And bad ones, he may have his own reasons why he wants to skew the information. Spin, I think, is the word that's used. Yes. All right, onward.
Okay, Joseph dreamt a dream and told it to his brothers. And from then on, they hated him still more. He said to them, "Pray hear this dream that I have dreamt."
And we all know it's so much fun when people tell us, "I had the great dream last
Yeah,
night."
right. Listen. Here we were binding sheaf bundles out in the field, and here my sheep arose. It was standing upright, and here Your shoes were circling around and bowing down to my shoes.
How many here's do we need in like one sentence, right? But it's a sign of excitement. It's a sign of how he's telling it, you know? And then it was like, you know, as someone might say in modern vernacular, and he's only a 17-year-old kid anyway, so we know what they're like when they're telling.
His brothers said to him, would you be king, yes, king over us? Or would you really rule, yes, rule us? From then on, they hated him still more for his dreams, for his words. But he dreamt still another dream and recounted it to his brothers. He said, here, I have dreamt still another dream. Here, the sun and the moon and 11 stars were bowing down to me. When he recounted it to his father and his brothers, his father rebuked him and said to him, what kind of dream is this that you have dreamt? Shall we come? Yeah, come. I, your mother, and your brothers, to bow down to you to the ground? His brothers envied him, while his father kept the matter in mind.
Okay. Maria?
Was that a foretelling of something to come in Joseph's future?
Was it a foretelling? Is this foreshadowing?
Yes.
Right.
Foreshadowing.
Foreshadowing, a foretelling. I mean, both of those, you know, are used by great literary epics to say, you know, this is what's likely to happen and giving you clues and hints about it. And we who have read this story before know absolutely that his dreams are true, that they are going to be fulfilled. Perhaps not in the way the brothers are personally fearful of. And as we know from the irony of life, the steps they take to stop his dreams are going to be exactly what is necessary to make them be fulfilled. Right? Because if his brothers didn't sell him into slavery, he never would have been in a position to end up in the prison, to end up with the inroad into Pharaoh's house. So it was entirely their fault that his dreams came true and they ended up bowing down.
So he was a teenager at this point.
So he's a teenager, yes.
Yes, he seems extremely naive about relationships.
Naive about relationships. How delicately put. It's like, duh, duh.
Yeah, he said
A typical 17-year-old, a little self-obsessed, a little self-absorbed, right? But all of that you are interpreting from this text. Right? It doesn't say that he's self-obsessed. It doesn't say that he's self-absorbed. It doesn't give us Joseph's internal dialogue. We don't get page after page, paragraph after paragraph of what he was thinking, what he was planning, why he wanted this, what he was hoping for. Was he excited about the idea of being ruler over them? Did he not even realize that was the most likely interpretation of his dream? And he was just sharing it because it was kind of that weird dream. We don't get that in this text. This text is very, very short on description. Very, very short on the feelings of the people, except to mention now twice that the brothers hate him. But other things that are going on in their minds, in their hearts, and of all the characters is really not being shared in an explicit way that would be familiar to modern readers.
Could it be that Hebrew doesn't have many adjectives?
Well, Hebrew's got plenty. And Hebrew knows how to describe these things. And if you read a modern Hebrew, well, it's not that the Torah doesn't have the vocabulary. The Torah chose not to tell the story with that vocabulary. Right. If you read a modern Israeli author, that is much more of the common literary style that we're used to, just in Hebrew. And when you translate it into English, it reads just like a regular English novel. So it's not just a deficiency of the language. It is a choice of the author.
I'm talking ancient Hebrew.
Ancient Hebrew had the words too. Yeah, they did. And we get a lot more descriptive words in other places. You only have to read Shir Shirim, the Song of Songs, to know how lyrically descriptive Hebrew can be when it wants to be of human emotions and of human bodies and of the relationship between these two lovers and their community around them. I mean, it goes on for chapters about this stuff when it's really just two people who are in love, which the Torah might have said with all of 2 sentences. So it's got the capacity. It just doesn't seem to be choosing to use it in this narrative section. And that produces problems for modern readers.
and produces a Talmud.
Well, it produces midrash and commentary throughout the ages, but how many of you from so far right now care about Joseph? And put aside your Judaism, right? Put aside our ancestry, put aside our faith. If you were just picking this up in Barnes & Noble and reading the first 2 paragraphs, How many of you would care what happens to this kid?
I would want to, I'd be curious.
You'd be curious, but would you go pay $25 for this book? I mean, first of all, the story looks like it's going to be done in about 5 minutes. And secondly, how much depth do we have to him? Not a whole lot, right? Usually those first few pages of a novel are trying to get you to have the emotional investment that you're willing to spend 500 pages with these characters and worrying about what's going to happen to them and what decisions they're going to make and what crises they will face. You don't see that in this style of narration.
But in many cases, you pick up a novel and you start reading it, and it takes 100 pages till you really get into it.
Absolutely.
Yes, right.
It says 100 pages later, and we're still, describing what their home street looked like. And it's like, come on with the action.
You've
Right.
read Thomas Wolfe then.
Many authors, exactly right. Many authors do exactly that. And the Torah, the action is happening by the second sentence of the story. And by action, I don't just mean, getting out of bed and going down to the breakfast table. I mean, we've already got the crisis of clashing relationships within the first couple sentences. That's a little fast. It's certainly the editor would tell the author, capital A, why don't you go back and delay the action a little bit more? Tell us a little bit more about the characters, flesh out the setting a little bit more. No, boom, straight to the point. Onward.
His brothers went to tend their father's sheep in Shechem. Yisrael said to Joseph, "Are not your brothers tending sheep in Shechem? Come, I will send you to them." He said to him, "Here I am."
Hineni.
And he said to him, "Come, pray, look into the well-being of your brothers and into the well-being of the sheep, and bring me back word." So he sent him out from the valley of Hebron, and he came to Shechem. And a man came upon him. Here he was roaming in the field. The man asked him, saying, "What do you seek?" He said, "I seek my brothers. Pray tell me, where are they tending sheep?" The man said, "They have moved on from here. Indeed, I heard them say, 'Let's go to Dothan.'" Joseph went after his brothers and came upon them in Dothan.
All right. Story's moving along apace. We went from the general, Jacob had sons, to the specific of Joseph, his relationship with his brothers, and now we're already into the micro event of what's going to be the trigger for the whole rest of the plot. I mean, and all of that in 3 paragraphs.
Every word here is important
Mm.
and has a meaning. And why was it urgent that they go from Shechem to
Dothan.
Dothan?
Or was it wrong that they went from Shechem to Dothan? Their father thinks they're in Shechem, and they're in Dothan. Are they doing what their father wanted them to do? Or are they off on the wrong place? Is Joseph going to give a bad report when he finds them in the wrong place?
And why is the man
Yeah.
there to tell
And
them?
who is this stranger? I mean, we've got more description of his
Yeah.
interaction with this stranger than we
Right.
do of him and his brothers in that first paragraph about the bad tales and the ornamental coat. I mean, everybody remembers, right, Joseph and the amazing coat, but nobody remembers about he met a guy in a field, and yet meeting the guy in a field gets more screen time than the coat did as far as counting words.
Right.
What? Again, the editor would come back and say, well, first of all, maybe you should describe that coat a little bit more, because it sounds like kind of an important thing, and it's going to come back later in the story. So maybe you should give us some details of what ornamentational style was it, right? And you can go on, but no, that's not the way the author chose to edit the work. Okay, onward. Otherwise, we're never going to get to the compare and contrast part.
They saw him from afar, and before he had gotten near them, they plotted cunningly against him to cause his death. They said, each man to his brother, "Here comes that dreamer. So now come, let us kill him and cast him into one of these pits and say an ill-tempered beast has devoured him. Then we will see what becomes of his dreams." When Reuben heard it, he tried to rescue him from their hand. He said, "Let us not take his life." And Reuben said to them, "Do not shed blood. Cast him into this pit that is in the wilderness, but do not lay a hand upon him, in order that he might save him from their hand to return him to his father." So it was, when Joseph came to his brothers, that they stripped Joseph of his coat, the ornamented coat that he had on, and took him and cast him into the pit. Now the pit was empty with no water in it, and they sat down to eat bread.
Okay, that's the major event. Right? They just beat up their brother.
Time to eat.
Time to
Time to
eat.
eat.
But wouldn't you have liked a little bit more detail? And what about this bit with Reuben, right? Reuven. He's trying to help say, why is he trying to stop them? And why doesn't he just say, no, we shouldn't hurt him. No matter how bad he is, we shouldn't do anything to him. And is that really all the persuasion he had? Don't murder him, just put him in a pit. Why not murder him? It's very, very thin.
That's a sin.
Well, that's a sin, but leaving him to die in a pit, that's okay.
Well, not as bad.
Not as bad, but the text doesn't tell us that, or at least not so far, of what was in Reuben's mind and what was going on, and how he tried to persuade his brothers. I mean, wouldn't you have loved to have heard that argument? Right, when they say, we're going to get him now, we're going to kill him. And Reuben steps forward and says, no, we shouldn't, let's put him in a pit. But it may be some explanation. Wouldn't you have liked to have heard that back and forth dialogue of what all the brothers felt? I mean, did any of the brothers agree with Reuben? Did they all disagree? Or
You don't know.
you don't know.
Not unless you saw Joseph in the technical.
Not unless you saw the movie. Right, not unless you saw the movie. Actually, in the movie, they completely gloss over the fact that the initial plan was to murder him and that he was then moved into the pit by Reuben. The play doesn't do that at all, although the play has a lot of other good things going for it. It does truncate the story in some places and expand it in others in ways that sometimes are interesting.
And by the way these brothers are, if Reuben goes against them too much, they may throw him into the pit too, or kill him.
But perhaps that's the concern. Exactly.
I don't know about these 10 guys. I don't know that much about them.
Well, we know that they're willing to even consider murdering their brother and then be talked down from it. So, okay.
Yeah, but Reuben was gonna go back and get Joseph.
But we don't know that yet.
He didn't tell them
Yes,
that.
yes, it does.
What?
It says it.
Oh, right, and that's right. That's right.
But he didn't tell them that.
No.
Right, that he might
That
save
was his
him.
plan, though.
Yeah, that he is planning to save them, but he doesn't tell them that, and we don't know how he convinced them to do this. Right.
They lifted up their eyes and saw there was a caravan of Ishmaelites coming from Gilad, their camels carrying balm, balsam, and ladanum, traveling to take them down to Egypt. Yehuda said to his brothers, "What gain is there if we kill our brother and cover up his blood? Come, let us sell him to the Ishmaelites. But let not our hand be upon him, for he is our brother, our flesh." And his brothers listened to him. Meanwhile, some Midianite men, merchants, passed by. They hauled up Joseph from the pit and sold Joseph to the Ishmaelites for 20 pieces of silver. They brought Joseph to Egypt. When Reuben returned to the pit, here Joseph was no more in the pit. He rented his garments and returned to his brothers and said, "The child is no more, and I, where am I to go?"
Okay. So, who sold Joseph?
The Midianites.
The Midianites, the brothers.
No,
Who took him?
some merchants.
The Midianites or the Ishmaelites?
Well,
Right.
the Ishmaelite caravan went by, and some Midianite guys came along.
So some Ishmaelites and Midianites walk into a bar.
Yeah,
There's a man in a pit. I mean, isn't this a little confusing? If you had an editor, wouldn't you hope the editor would say, could you go maybe explain this a little bit more clearly? Because I can't tell whether the they sold him is referring to the Midianites, which is the most immediate noun, or whether it's referring to the brothers who were the people who were discussing the sale in the first place, and sort out what happens between Midianites, Ishmaelites, and brothers. It would really make this paragraph, or maybe chapter, much more understandable for the reader. You know?
And why do I know in more detail what the camels were carrying? If you're gonna,
What details are you
words.
choosing to share,
Yeah.
right?
balsam,
Just say it was a caravan.
Yeah, right.
Who needs the rest of the stuff? And where did Reuben go?
Yeah, where did he go? He
Right?
wasn't there.
He's surprised by coming back and finding the pit empty.
Where did he go?
But-
He went to talk to the Ishmaelites.
He went to talk to the Ishmaelites,
While the
but
Midianites came along.
and took him out. But then if he took him out, I mean, then that means the brothers didn't actually sell Joseph. They only wanted to.
Huh.
It's a very, very
Yeah.
confusing text. Yes, needs to go back for another edit. All right,
He probably went to-
Absolutely.
he
Almost
probably
there.
went to call his father. Okay. Should continue on?
Yep.
But they took Joseph's coat, they slew a hairy goat, and dipped the coat in the blood. They had the ornamented coat sent out and had it brought to their father and said, "We found this. Pray recognize whether it is your son's coat or not." He recognized it and said, "My son's coat! An ill-tempered beast has devoured him. Joseph is torn to pieces." Yaakov rent his clothes. He put sackcloth on his loins and mourned his son for many days. All his sons and daughters arose to comfort him, but he refused to be comforted. He said, "No, I will go down to my son in mourning to Sheol." Thus his father wept for him. Meanwhile, the Midianites had sold him into Egypt to Potiphar, Pharaoh's court official, chief of the palace guard. Yeah.
Why aren't the Ishmaelites doing the sale, right?
Yeah.
But
Well, these Israelites were for Midian.
so, I mean, obviously, there are many, many different commentaries about who exactly does the sale, but I don't want to get bogged down in that. But look for a moment about Yaakov's reaction.
Yeah.
That's it. That's all we're getting of the father's grief. Wouldn't you have expected a eulogy, a long lament? What about, did he have suspicions of the brothers or not? Did he just accept this version of the story? But remember, he was keeping an eye on things that was mentioned before. Did he have any self-guilt that he had sent out Joseph? Even if he didn't suspect the brothers, he was the one who told Joseph to go look at them, check on them, which means if he hadn't said that, then Joseph would still be alive. But we don't know any of that because the text doesn't have it, or at least doesn't have it in a way that we're used to reading it. And that's kind of the point that I want to drive home before we look at the reworking that we're going to see, which is the Torah is trying to tell us the answers to almost all of the questions you could imagine, but it's doing it in a form of language that is very, very concise and very, very laden with meaning in each and every word, which is forcing the reader to engage with other readers to figure out the full sense of the story. Right, when you read a latest bestseller, you do not need anyone else to discuss it with to know what the story is about. And if you did, the author would probably be in trouble with his editor, because the book is supposed to be self-sufficient. You're not supposed to need to study it with someone else to figure it out. But this style of narrative was meant to be collectively read and understood, not individually understood. It was meant to be told to a group, and the group was meant to then understand it as a group, not just I sit down and read it for entertainment and I know what happens and then I put it down. There is a sense of internalizing this and of digesting it that is required by the way this was narrated, and which, as we're going to see, if you take out, changes the sense and flavor of the story completely. Rhea, before we go to the other version?
What about his mother?
Well, his
It
mother,
talks about the sons and daughters came to sympathize with
Right.
the father, to mourn with
Right.
him. But what about the mother?
Rachel has passed away at this point. His mother is dead.
I remember Rachel's.
Yeah,
dream.
but I don't remember that.
That happened prior to this.
Yeah.
What's that? She died in childbirth, giving birth to his brother Benjamin. Exactly. Okay, so
No, I.
Next page. what? Oh, another hand? Yes.
It says daughters in plural. I
Mhm.
thought there were only one.
Well, there's daughters in plural. Thank you for very close reading, right? We only hear about Dinah, right, which we hear about very unpleasantly in the previous section. But here it mentions daughters. Now, are those his daughters? And indeed, there are midrashim that there were daughters born as well, but as they were not plot significant, their names were not given. Or are those granddaughters? Because remember, the sons are all older than Joseph and Benjamin. Right? Joseph and Benjamin are right down near the bottom of the ages. Some argument about a few of the others, but basically most of them are likely to be in their 20s, 30s, or maybe even older. So Jacob probably has grandkids. So maybe the daughters are granddaughters. But you're absolutely right. It's something that sticks out when we put it together with everything else we've read, and is forcing the reader to ask that question and then try to figure it out. The author doesn't tell you it all for you. Okay, so I didn't want to just pick a modern retelling of the story of Joseph because that would have been too easy. I wanted to pick something that was a little bit older, but was one of the first attempts to provide a comprehensive retelling of the entire history of our people in narrative form. And this is the work of Josephus. Josephus wrote not just a history of the War of the Jews, which was the history of the Great Revolt against Rome, but he also wrote afterwards a book called the Antiquities, which is essentially an attempt to write an entire history of the Jewish people up to that point for a non-Jewish audience, so that they would understand us better. It's believed by many scholars that Josephus wrote this not just as a way of solving his conscience for having written his book about the Roman Jewish War, which didn't paint us always in a great light, but that he was writing this as a way to explain the Jewish people to get more respect within the Roman Empire, so that we would not just be those troublemakers who keep attacking us, but would recognize that we had a long, illustrious, and really very honorable history. And this is his account of one part of what we just read. And it's picking up at the part where Joseph is coming across the pastures and the brothers see him. Got it? Okay. And you'll notice, by the way, already that we are in a narrower typeset, and it's about twice as long, even though it's dealing with only one part.
Oh my goodness. Okay. Now these brothers rejoiced as soon as they saw their brother coming to them.
Did it say rejoice in the first version?
Not exactly.
No. I mean, wouldn't you have thought maybe they were unhappy that, no, look, here comes Mr. Dreamer.
Yeah.
No, they're happy according to Josephus.
Not indeed as at the presence of a near relation, or as at the presence of one sent by their father, but as at the presence of an enemy, and one that by divine providence was delivered into their hands, and they had already resolved to kill him, and not let slip the opportunity that lay before them.
They saw him from afar, and before he had gotten near them, they plotted cunningly against him to cause his death.
Yeah.
That's a paragraph now. What happened?
They got him alone with no witnesses.
No. What happened to Josephus here? I mean, where did he get this
I
from?
don't know. Oh,
Made it up.
no.
Made it up is such a harsh term.
That was his
He
interpretation.
embroidered it.
It was his interpretation. It may have been how it was explained to him. That is to say, this may have been part of the midrashim that he had received from his teachers. And when he writes it down, rather than saying, this is the text, and here are the teachings about the text, he weaves it together into one cohesive passage. And in the process, he has taken out that collective wrangling, discussing, questioning about it. He's answered all the questions that you didn't even know you had before you had them, so that you now know everything that's going on and think that you're done. Right? Does this paragraph make you want to ask as many questions about it as the Torah version? Or again, if you didn't have the Torah version to go off of, or are you just going to ask questions about the difference between this one and the Torah one? This becomes much more similar to what we know of a modern style writing. All right, keep going.
But when Reuben, the eldest of them, saw them thus disposed, and that they had agreed together to execute their purpose, he tried to restrain them, showing them the heinous enterprise they were going about, and the horrid nature of it, that this action would appear wicked in the sight of God, and impious before men, even though they should kill one not related to them, but much more flagellous and detestable, to appear to have slain their own brother, by which act the father must be treated unjustly in the son's slaughter, and the mother also be in perplexity while she laments that her son is taken away from her. And this is not a natural way either.
That's a nice sentence, isn't it?
Oh my gosh. That's to explain it, right?
Yeah, Thomas Wolfe got nothing on him, right?
So he entreated them to have a regard to their own consciences and wisely consider what mischief would betide them upon the death of so good a child and their youngest brother, that they would also fear God, who was already both a spectator and a witness of the designs they had against their brother, that he would love them if they abstained from this act and yielded to repentance and amendment. But in case they proceeded to do the fact, all sorts of punishments would overtake them from God for this murder of their brother, since they polluted his providence, which was everywhere present, and which did not overlook what was done either in deserts or in cities. For wheresoever a man is, there ought he to suppose that God is also.
All right, how are we doing so far? We're sentence by sentence. We're working our way through this. Kind of wordy?
Yeah, kind of.
This isn't what you'd like us to be chanting every Shabbat?
This is extreme.
Yes.
Extremely wordy.
Go from one pole to another.
Yes.
From one pole to another. But notice again what we have done now. What Reuben says in the Torah is just, do not shed blood, cast them into the pit that is in the wilderness. That's what Reuben says.
Mhm.
And here,
It tells why.
he was saying it and what arguments he might have used. That he's going into all the detail of why murder is wrong and why you shouldn't think you can get away with this and God is everywhere. And there is a great deal more explanation, embellishment if you like, but really detail. Now, it may be a little wordy and the style may not be quite 21st century literature, but it would be very easy to take Josephus's and to modernize it, and it would sound true. It would sound like a modern novel. Not so easy to do that with the Torah itself.
But it raises another question, at least for me.
Mhm.
He already knew, because they already resolved to kill him.
Right.
And then Reuben, when they saw him, then he starts trying to talk him out of it. Why
Right.
did he wait so long to try to talk him out of it? Why didn't he have this conversation ahead of time?
And try to persuade them otherwise.
Persuade them otherwise?
Well, I mean, that's a great question. And indeed, the commentators do argue about whether or not it was a spontaneous act or whether they were waiting for opportunity. Josephus is coming down on the side that they're waiting for opportunity. And Reuben, I believe, in that context, would have been hoping that opportunity would not present itself, and therefore he would not have to pit himself against his brothers. Right? Why bother trying to argue them out of something that will never happen? It's like when you have a kid that says, when I grow up, I want to be a motorcycle stunt driver, right? Well, when you're 6 years old, you really want to get into an argument with a 6-year-old about they can't be a motorcycle stunt driver? Or do you just go, well, that'd be interesting, buy them a toy motorcycle and realize that in 6 months, they'll forget that they ever said it. As they say, pick your battles. So perhaps Reuben was simply hoping that God, which is figuring prominently here and not so much in the Torah story, that God wouldn't have it happen, that there would be an opportunity for the brothers to act on their plans. But apparently there is different providence at work here.
He told them further that their consciences would be their enemies if they attempted to go through so wicked an enterprise, which they can never avoid, whether it be a good conscience or whether it be such a one as they will have within them when once they have killed their brother. He also added this besides to what he had said before, that it was not a righteous thing to kill a brother, though he had injured them, that it is a good thing to forget the actions of such near friends, even in things wherein they might seem to have offended, but that they were going to kill Joseph, who had been guilty of nothing that was ill toward them, in whose case the infirmity of his small age should rather procure him mercy and move them to unite together in the care of his preservation, that the cause of killing him made the act itself much worse, while they determined to take him off out of envy at his future prosperity, an equal share of it which they would naturally partake while he enjoyed it, since they were to him not strangers but the nearest relations, for they might reckon upon what God had bestowed upon Joseph as their own, and that it was fit for them to believe that the anger of God would be for this cause be more severe upon them if they slew him who was judged by God to be worthy of that prosperity which was to be hoped for, and while by murdering him they made it impossible for God to bestow it upon him.
All right. What a long set of arguments, right? This is a pretty extensive argument on behalf of not murdering Joseph, right? He's gone through the moral, he's gone through the conscience, he's gone through how unfair it is to the laws of nature and to their father to have to grieve for the loss of a child, that no father should have to see their son die. And now he's also saying, look, why are you even upset with him? So he's going to be prosperous. His prosperity is ours. And he's young, and young people do stupid things. Shouldn't that be a reason to forgive him? And besides, if he does prosper, it'll help us. It's a very, very convincing argument. And also one that would have been very, very instructive to anybody reading it about how we should behave when we have an enemy. The text in the Torah itself does not explicitly engage all of these issues. The text in the Torah itself definitely is not lauding the brothers for killing Joseph or for nearly killing him, but it doesn't condemn them explicitly either. And it doesn't lay out all the reasons why it is wrong for them to want to and then to carry out their plan as they did. It just says they did. And the repercussions of their plan are left to the astute collective reading of figuring out all the things that happened to the brothers afterwards as being a consequence of their misdeeds. Whereas Reuben is laying it all out for us and laying it out in a way that all of us could put ourselves in that position and realize that even if we have an enemy, we shouldn't treat them bad because we should consider these topics too. See, all done for us. Nice, neat, even if it's very wordy. I'm guessing that from the looks around the table, most of you would rather run out and read Everett Fox's Torah than run out and buy Josephus's Antiquities. You're not going to curl up with a nice copy of Antiquities later. You can find it online, by the way. It's public domain, Project Gutenberg, wonderful resource. Everett Fox you'll have to actually buy because it's a modern translation and therefore copyrighted. So let's see what the repercussions are.
Reuben said these and many other things.
There was more even.
And used entreaties to them, and thereby endeavored to divert them from the murder of their brother. But when he saw that his discourse had not mollified them at all, and that they made haste to do the fact, he advised them to alleviate the wickedness they were going about in the manner of taking Joseph off. For as he had exhorted them first, when they were going to revenge themselves, to be dissuaded from doing it. So, since the sentence for killing their brother had prevailed, he said that they would not, however, be so grossly guilty if they would be persuaded to follow his present advice, which would include what they were so eager about, but was not so very bad, but in the distress they were in, of a lighter nature. He begged of them, therefore, not to kill their brother with their own hands, but to cast him into the pit that was hard by, and so to let him die, by which they would gain so much that they would not defile their own hands with his blood. To this the young men readily agreed. So Reuben took the lad and tied him to a cord and let him down gently into the pit, for it had no water in it at all, who, when he had done this, went his way to seek for such pasturage as was fit for feeding his flocks.
All right, so what have we added or changed?
Reuben was.
Where Reuben was, right? It was his turn to go out with the flocks. And so having taken care of this and now ensured that Joseph wasn't going to die, he can go off and do that with a clean conscience without worry. Make sense? We also figured out, according to Josephus at least, why the text bothered to tell us there was no water in it. It told us there was no water in the pit in order to let us know that that means Reuben had to let him down gently. Because generally speaking, if you fling someone into a stone pit, it's going to hurt if there's no water in it. So by telling us there's no water, we now know that there was also a gentle lowering, which, again, Josephus has made explicit for us because most of us probably wouldn't have thought of that on our own, but we might have thought of it if we were studying in a group. And indeed, that is discussed among many of the commentaries in Midrashim of exactly why point out about the pit's emptiness. Make sense? Maybe? Okay, onward. Now we're going to get to the sale.
Yeah, I didn't realize that Reuben was the one who lowered him in the pit. I'm not sure.
It does not explicitly say that Reuben lowered him in the
But
pit.
here he's very clear.
And
about
here
it.
Josephus makes it very clear that it's Reuben
Reuben,
because
yeah,
it
does.
makes it fits that Reuben would be lowering him gently, whereas the other brothers would say, okay, fine, we won't kill him.
Oh, right.
And Reuben is, no, we won't kill him. We'll just put him down here gently and we'll leave him there until later when everyone else is asleep.
But Judah, being one of Jacob's sons also, seeing some Arabians of the posterity of Ishmael, carrying spices and Syrian ware out of the land of Gilead to the Egyptians, after Reuben was gone, advised his brothers to draw Joseph out of the pit and sell him to the Arabians. For if he should die among strangers a great way off, they should be freed from this barbarous action. This, therefore, was resolved on. So they drew Joseph up out of the pit and sold him to the merchants for 20 pounds. He was now 17 years old. But Reuben, coming in the nighttime to the pit, resolved to save Joseph without the consent of his brothers. And when, upon calling to him, he made no answer, He was afraid that they had destroyed him after he was gone, of which he complained to his brothers. But when they told him what they had done, Reuben left off his mourning.
Okay. Any changes?
There's no discussion in either commentary about, sounds as though Joseph was very passive.
Well, I think he was outnumbered.
Yeah.
But you're right. There doesn't seem to be a record of Joseph's own feelings, his own internal reflection, which is something that in a modern retelling would double or triple the length all over again. If we were going to have all of Joseph's, did he feel remorse?
Yeah.
Did he feel guilt? Was he only angry at his brothers? Did he understand why they were doing this? Did he argue with them? Did he plead?
Yeah, why didn't he try to talk him out of it? I mean, he had a way with words.
We find eventually, but maybe at 17, not so much.
Well, when he conjured up these dreams and things like that, so
Right.
the kid had something up here. But he didn't, he didn't try to, according to this, he didn't try to defend himself.
Or at least we have no
Talk them out of it.
we have no record. Exactly.
That's right.
And
All
and
you hear about is Reuben's feelings,
Uh-huh.
not anyone else's
Right.
until Judah
Right.
comes in.
On the other hand, these dreams are inspired by God in Joseph.
absolutely, but
This is what God is saying. Now, maybe there's some of the other words, not
Right.
so much, but this.
But as Monka says, we only hear about Reuben's feelings and then eventually Judah's feelings and no one else's. But in the Torah, we didn't hear about hardly anyone's feelings except for the generalized hatred and his father's over affection. That was it. So we've got more than we did, but it's still a lot less than would go to print in the modern world. It's still not a full telling, in quotes, that we would be looking for.
Well, the publisher would say, we want more.
Yeah, the publisher would say, well, wait, while Joseph is down in this pit, before they decide to sell him, why don't we do a little internal dialogue with himself down? How does he feel? Was the pit dark? Was it light? Was this a natural pit? Was this a carved pit? Was this normally used for water or not?
Were there any snakes in the
Were there
pit?
any snakes? Indeed, the Midrash does go into that, scorpions quite famously. So there's a lot more that we would have asked the author to put in if we were interested in having the full narration of the story, which again comes back to something we've said before, which is that the full narration of the story isn't the only or sometimes even the primary objective of the telling of the Torah. Right? The Torah wasn't written so that we would have an accurate recording of the narration of the story. The Torah was written so that we would have an accurate sense of our history, yes, but also an accurate guidance for how our own behavior should be modified or regulated in our own day-to-day actions. And the Torah gives us as much information as is necessary for that point, even if it makes it much harder to come up with a movie script. Right? Which is why every biblical movie just does whatever they feel like when they decide to actually make a movie. And there is a new one coming out about the Exodus. Yeah, when's that one coming out? Does anyone know?
Friday.
Is it this? It is this week, right? Yeah. I knew it was very, very soon. So we'll have to
How
see.
can it be Exodus without Charlton?
Yeah, well, I think he's gotten a little bit on in age for playing Moses.
Technical line.
So this one seems. So this new version of Exodus seems to have a lot more sword fighting in it than I remember from the story. But we'll see. Okay, we're almost done.
What's his name?
We can check it in IMDb later. Okay.
When Joseph's brothers had done thus to him, they considered what they should do to escape the suspicions of their father. Now, they had taken away from Joseph the coat which he had on when he came to them at the time they let him down into the pit. So they thought it proper to tear that coat to pieces and to dip it into goat's blood, and then to carry it and show to their father that he might believe he was destroyed by wild beasts. And when they had done so, they came to the old man. But this not till what had happened to his son had already come to his knowledge.
That is to say, Jacob already knows that Joseph is gone, and now they're producing the evidence to explain his absence.
Then they said they hadn't seen Joseph,
Didn't see him, don't know.
don't know what had befallen him, but that they had found his coat bloody and torn to pieces, whence they had a suspicion that he had fallen among wild beasts and so perished, if that was the coat he had on when he came from home. Mhm. Now,
Do you remember what he was wearing when he left home?
How come the coat wasn't eaten?
Well, it was sort of ripped up.
because they needed something to show to their father.
Yes.
Okay, excuse me, I lost my head.
Yes, right. Now Jacob had before some better hopes that his son was only made a captive, but now he laid aside that notion and supposed that this coat was an evident argument that he was dead, for he well remembered that this was the coat he had on when he sent him to his brothers. So he hereafter lamented the lad as now dead, and as if he had been the father of no more than one, without taking any comfort in the rest. And so he was also affected with his misfortune before he met with Joseph's brothers, when he also conjectured that Joseph was destroyed by wild beasts. He sat down also clothed in sackcloth and in heavy affliction, insomuch that he found no ease when his sons comforted him, neither did his pains remit by length of time.
All right, that's the story so far.
It seems to me that what the brothers conveyed to Jacob was more like piled on him. If I hadn't sent my son Joseph to his brothers, none of this would have happened.
Absolutely. And the Hebrew and even Everett Fox's translation brings that up into a broader sense even more, which is, did I do this? By showing him the symbol of the coat, according to our commentators and the Midrashim, it is putting the blame at the foot of Jacob for having had a favorite. And when he knew from his own life experience of what it was like to be a favorite of one parent, that it was his coat that had caused the vicious beast of jealousy to kill Jacob, to kill Joseph. So the Hebrew was even, more emphatic of the hekerna, recognize this, acknowledge it. This is at your doing. The coat is yours. The death is your responsibility. It's even more poignant in the Hebrew when you recognize that literary style. Whereas here, Josephus has spelled it out in more detail and made it a little bit clearer perhaps for us, but also has taken away that coming together and of analysis and of thinking and of wondering that would come from just the pure Hebrew. So we get it, we get a hint of it, but it also in its own way is stopping it. By doing the work for us, it prevents us from going further more easily. Does that make sense? Right? It's kind of like helping a kid with their homework.
Yeah.
Yes, you get them through that problem, but you don't necessarily, or rather not helping, but doing the homework for the kid, you get them through that assignment, but you don't necessarily help them get further than that assignment. And what Josephus did, which again, I have to remind you was really intended for mostly a non-Jewish audience, was to get them through the basics of understanding our people and our history with as much information as he thought they needed and no more. Whereas for us, we still would have studied from the original with the commentaries and teachings of our sages and people in our own interaction to really give it much more than what Josephus did. The full telling of the Torah, the full telling of the story of our people doesn't fit in a library because it's constantly being created, added, and formed by our study, by our reading. You can't just stick it in one book. And Josephus may seem wordy, but think about the fact that we have for the last 4 years in this room spent an hour often on a paragraph each week. Imagine if you were to add all of our discussions together in text form for each of those paragraphs, and then imagine doing that for all of the discussions over all of the centuries. Think of how big a book that would be. Right.
But this seems that this theme is one that keeps being emphasized. That is, don't favor one child over the other. God favors Abel's sacrifice over Cain's, and the results are disaster. Then we have Isaac and Sarah and Abraham who favor one child, and that's a disaster. Now we have it again, as though we're not getting the message.
So there's two ways to look at that message, and you're right. I'm picking up on this theme. One way is saying don't favor a child over another, and indeed, the Torah is explicit about that later on, even in quote the worst case scenario of the son of an unloved wife. But there's also the flip side, which is if somebody seems to be favored more than you, don't make that the focus of your life. Don't make vengeance and jealousy and that envy the path that you walk down. And I think that's really meant to be more of the full plot, because when you get to the story of Ephraim and Manasseh, we still have one son being favored over the other, and they don't fight about it. And indeed, according to our tradition, that's why we bless our sons with the names of Ephraim and Manasseh. May you be like Ephraim and Manasseh, because they didn't continue the path of envy. That, yes, you're not supposed to treat one child better than another, but if you grow up or either feeling that you've been treated better than someone else or vice versa, or that you feel your neighbor is getting better than you, or you feel that the other nations are doing better than Israel, you know, in the broadest sense of the term, that doesn't mean that you make envy and anger your compass. It doesn't mean it's fair, but it also doesn't mean you make it your compass.
Life isn't fair. Deal with it.
Deal with it. The deal with it part is the important one.
Yeah, how we do. Not by throwing your brother in a pit. No, that's not the good way.
But
No.
it's up to you.
But
To do it
You
better.
might be
Deal with it.
tempted.
keep in mind,
You might indeed, and Torah is really clear about that.
if they didn't throw him in the pit,
Well,
then Joseph wouldn't have wound
yeah,
up in Egypt,
Ah.
and famine would
But hold
have
on a second.
destroyed.
Malka, you're absolutely right. But who makes that declaration?
God,
No.
no.
No?
Who says
Joseph says it.
it was God's plan for me to be in the pit because otherwise I couldn't have saved the family?
Right.
Joseph says that,
Joseph says
Yes.
and thereby demonstrating again that Joseph has learned, I'm not going to live with anger and with hate and with envy for all the years they had of freedom that I lost and all the years they had with my father that I lost. I'm going to see this in the best possible way that it is, which is I'm in a position to help my family.
But it didn't stop him from toying with them for a couple of iterations.
No, he
Toying
had-
with him, testing
he
him
got
is
it.
a debate in our tradition. And I personally do feel that our tradition is quite right when the majority of commentators say he wasn't just getting his kicks, but he was testing them to see whether they had repented from what they had done. And I think that our tradition is quite accurate in that. And the way he stages it, he is able to isolate Benjamin and as well as Shimon to see whether or not the brothers are going to take it out on the new favorite or not. And when they don't, when they stand up for him, that's when he reveals himself. And so why would he reveal himself when he did? Why would he break down and cry? Why would he have forgiven them? If not because he had now proven to himself through their actions that they were different than they were when they pushed him in the pit. So I think that I personally believe, but because we will have that conversation is exactly why the Torah was written the way it was written. If a modern author were to tell us that, we would be left with no opportunity of speculating on what he felt, on whether he was toying with them, whether he was testing them. We would never go back and analyze each step of the process of his interaction with the brothers and sending them back in the cup and the thing and all. We wouldn't go through all of that because the author would have told us what we were supposed to learn. And then we would either accept it or reject it as a bad book and move on. The Torah was written in a way that we don't get to do that. We have to sit in a group. We have to analyze it. We have to listen to other opinions, and we have to work to understand what it's trying to tell us. And we'll do it again and again and again. And that makes it stick in our soul very, very differently than even the best book you've ever read. You may love Charles Dickens, and I don't mean to be picking on Dickens. You may love Charles Dickens, and it may be your favorite, maybe one of his books is your favorite novel of all time. But no matter how beautiful his works were, they don't lend itself to teaching you how to think about life moment by moment, word by word. You may hold on to some of the messages of the big plot points of some of the great books of history, and you should, because there are some amazingly good and insightful literary works that have been created throughout history. But none of them can hold a candle to the style of the Torah narrative and legal section as well, which is even harder to engage for a modern reader, to capturing us in the story, capturing us in the understanding, rather than simply handing it to us. And because it captures us and pulls us in, it makes its life and its questions our life and our questions day after day after day, which is why we're still reading it day after day after day. Any other questions for today? Then go read.
Okay, go forth and read.
And remember, keep reading with other people and talk about what you've read with other people. Hello. Wakey, wakey. There we go.